Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the quest anthology Tales from the Stonehill Inn, designed by Matthew Ashcraft for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Now, if you're like me, you might have forgotten that the Stonehill Inn is the name of the inn from Phandalin. And of course, Phandalin should be very recognizable for just about anybody who's played D&D now, coming from the very, very popular starter adventure, Lost Mines of Phandelver, as well as the Essentials Kit starter adventure, The Dragon of Icespire Peak, which also takes place in Phandalin and obviously includes the Stonehill Inn. So the Stonehill Inn isn't exactly a important location necessarily in those adventures, but this one is a smart way of expanding on content that most DMs are probably running, especially new DMs, and providing a lot of specifically low-level side quests that all happen to originate from that inn, which is a really cool idea and I think would be very helpful for most DMs and parties. So all the quests are designed for about level 1 through 5, and for the most part are relatively simple and straightforward. It's tricky for me to criticize the quests for that because they're partly designed to be relatively simple and straightforward. So it's a lot of fetch quests, it's a lot of just go here and find this thing, or go kill these things, or that kind of nature. So it's hard to necessarily include that as a negative trait for these quests, because I think that's part of the design process. I was, however, annoyed with the fact that a lot of these quests have a lot of ambiguous design notes, or just kind of a lack of content, and you'll see what I mean when I actually go through it, because there's 10 of these here, so we can actually kind of run through them relatively quickly, and I can show you what kind of quest you'll be looking at. But I was impressed with the variety. There's a nice variety of different styles and types of quests that you can unleash on your players. So the first one is called Belinda, and all of these quests involve a collection of NPCs that it suggests you could introduce early on. There's a halfling playing an instrument. There's an old wizard sitting in the corner. There's these different people that you can introduce early, and then maybe over the course of a campaign, as your players are actually hanging out in this inn, you can then introduce these different characters, including Tobin, which is the actual innkeeper. And they all become quest givers, basically, at different points throughout these side quests, which is a cool idea. So you could introduce these people early, and then they could all come to you with various problems, as people do. In the case of Belinda, it's the musician's lute was stolen, just a classic, like he got beat up one night and his lute was taken, and that's pretty much as straightforward as it gets. You track down the bandits. I think the innkeeper, Tobin, knows where there's a abandoned mansion somewhere that these bandits are hanging out at. You go beat them up, and there's a little bit of a twist because the loot isn't actually there. They've already sold it. So it's just an additional step where you have to go chase down the people you actually sold it to, which is a non-combatant with a couple more bandits. So you can maybe turn into maybe a social situation or just another combat situation. But you can rescue the loot and return it. And it's pretty straightforward. Like I'm happy there's like 2 steps at least there, but otherwise that's pretty much it. That's kind of the length that we're going for. Grave robbers could very well involve no combat whatsoever. You're approached by a woman who has this kind of intricate backstory that's almost very Cinderella-esque, where her stepmother, her father married, her mother died, her father remarried, and it was a mean woman, and instead of stepdaughter, she had stepsons. That part doesn't really matter, I guess. Anyway, and then this evil stepmother actually died and was buried with this jewelry that the woman wants. That's a convoluted way to say, hey, go grave rob for me. Which the interesting thing here is that it's technically unlawful for the characters to go do that. Like, and the yes, the stepmom might have been an asshole, and the sons are good for nothing, but you don't ever get the justification of what you're doing is lawful, because you're just robbing from these people. It might be morally correct, and it does mention that in the design process, that like, hey, this has consequences, and the fact that the players should be able to stealth and sneak, and it's kind of a clandestine mission. But part of the problem is, again, there's an ambiguousness to all these to a lot of these adventures where it's like, well, try and come up with a DC that involves, stealthing and maybe the sons come out and investigate, but it's not really designed like I want it to be designed, which is script those things for me. Like explain like, okay, give me a firm design script where it's like this, you have to do this, turn into a skill challenge or something. You have to do this many checks. You have to be stealthy. Maybe at this point, like an animal comes wandering by, so you have to make an animal handling check. Maybe one of the sons comes out and you have to make a social check. Like, make it into a thing and don't just leave it up to the DMs to try to come up with all this. Cause I want as somebody reading this, I want the designer to give me all these notes. And then of course, as a DM running it, I can then make all the modifications that I want. The Halfling Bandit is definitely my favorite of all of these quests because, of course, it's the dungeon crawl, and I love dungeon crawls. And it's a pretty good well-designed dungeon crawl with a cool twist at the end, actually. In fact, this one could be expanded into a whole little mini adventure. One of the gamblers approaches you in the inn and says, "Hey, I've got I've gambled away my savings, but I've got this treasure map that leads to this bandit, and I know where this dungeon is that we should go check out." Which is this kind of old abandoned manor type area. And you go there and, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and show you. So at the end of this entire product is a bunch of maps, which is really awesome. And I was going to skip that to the end, but it's kind of difficult to talk about like dungeon crawls without looking at the map. So we are given full grid color battle maps for just about every single quest and encounter in this book, which is a huge plus. As somebody who very frequently complains about a lack of maps and visual aids in a lot of these DM's Guild products, this one definitely provides, which I am very impressed by. It is a very unique art style that I don't see very often, which I can only describe as like early 90s Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis games. Not quite pixel art, but kind of looks very similar to that style. But I think it's fine. It looks good. It would have been nice if we had gotten an actual map of the Stonehill Inn. I think that's pretty lacking because obviously all these adventures start in the Stonehill Inn, but none of them actually involve like combat there. So technically what this does is give you all the situations where you might involve like combat on the road or at the farms or at these different areas. This is the actual dungeon map here, which has 2 different maps associated with it, but huge thumbs up there. So this dungeon crawl, there's a rug of smothering. You can actually see the rug. There's traps with arrows flying out. There's a helmed horror sitting in a cell, and then there's a secret door that then leads to the final boss, like a spectator. It's just a nice little dungeon that makes sense about why this would be an abandoned dungeon. It's a bunch of monsters that don't have to, eat or drink or anything. And then at the end, when you actually defeat the spectator and you see all the treasure and stuff, the halfling says, "Oh, thank you for leading me to my father's, secret hideout. I needed someone to clear out the monsters," and then he's got a bunch of guards that just kind of show up, and it's this final little twist scene, which I thought was really cool. The quest giver turns out to be like a kind of an epilogue final fight, and then you get to finally loot everything. So huge thumbs up on Halfling Bandit. I thought that was a really fun dungeon crawl and a well designed with a nice little twist at the end. Inferno is a classic burning building situation, which I don't see very often in D&D also, and it's something that would allow a lot of thinking outside the box to occur for players because there's no combat here, but there is a bunch of hazards. Where it's a classic like, "Oh, help me, my husband ran back in to save my children and haven't come back out." And you have to go save them from this burning building. But this is also a case where I was very frustrated with the ambiguity of this quest. Like, again, if you're going to design this quest, then design a bunch of scripted encounters that occur. If you don't want to turn it into a dungeon crawl where it's literally like, hey, you enter this room and then this fire thing happens in this room, then at least do a okay, at a certain point, here's like 4 events that can occur, and then you can choose to run any one of these in whatever order. So it would be like, the stairs collapse and you fall down, or the fire just blares really hot and you got to make this save, or the smoking, the inhalation is going to injure you. All of these things. It does mention the fact you have to make a con save every few minutes to even stay conscious, but otherwise, it just says, an important thing to remember when running this quest is the house is continuously burning. This is a small idea that can be grown by an attentive and inventive DM. Make sure the fire spreads. Perhaps the stairs burn away, trapping everyone upstairs and forcing them to go out the windows. There are plenty of tense situations available in this small quest idea, and you should put your players through the ringer. Now, this is designed for new DMs specifically. So I want to make it very clear to anybody watching and the designer also, is if you're going to provide this information, don't narratively throw up your hands and say, "Hey, DMs, I've given you an idea, run with it." Like, it is implied in every single product that I'm going to run as a DM that I can run with whatever you give me. Like, that's the whole idea, is I can modify or change whatever I want. But if I'm specifically buying a product that is somebody else designed it, then I want to know what you designed. I don't want you to just tell me, hey, good luck, and run it. I just gave you the simplest of adventure hooks. That's not what I want to see at all. So I like the idea here. It's a good adventure hook, but then design it. I want to see what your designs are. I want to see you design the stairs collapsing, having to go out the window, and all the different checks and things that are involved there. I want to see, and you don't have to be a strict mechanical skill challenge. Like I said, it could be just a series of events and a series of saving throws that you have to survive against or something. But I found that lack of actual content, I get, is a weird way to describe it, but it really kind of lacks like firm content. Instead, leaves a lot of it just kind of up in the air for DMs to figure out. So that was very annoying for me. Kensington Fever is started out interesting, where somebody shows up in a plague doctor mask and they say, hey, there's a sickness, I need to find this certain flower. And it just boils down to a bunch of random encounters. You have to go and search for this person who should know about the flower, and then from there you search for the flower itself, and it's just a series of encounters. One of them is a bunch of Dwergar who just kind of attack you on the road, and the other one is a bunch of goblins who just murder the shit out of this one family patriarch, and then you have to save them. It's literally just a random encounter. So the flower thing, the sickness thing, none of that really matters at all. I guess it's an excuse to just go out somewhere. Redtail Brewery is kind of the same thing, unfortunately. It's a fetch quest, which is just what we did. And again, it's random encounters. At least this time, the bandits have motivation, where you find a bunch of scarecrows on the road, and then you get the ale delivery from this Redtail Brewery to deliver to the Stonehill Inn, and a bunch of bandits show up to basically steal it. I think it would have been more interesting if maybe you were told the barrels were supposed to come and they didn't come, and then you had to go investigate it, and then you find the wreckage, and then you have to go into maybe a goblin cave or something. Would have been more interesting. Or if you have to play escort mission and actually escort these barrels, and then have a series of events that happen, and not all of them should be combat related. And maybe there's a storm or something, or get a broken wheel, make it, and then of course you can have bandits attack or whatever. But instead it just ends up being kind of a series of random encounters. The Roundup is similar to the Inferno, where I liked the idea, but it was too ambiguous for me, which is a traveling circus, essentially, that has the caged animals on a train, a cart, a bunch of carts, has basically fallen over, and a couple of the animals escaped. And by animals, I mean cockatrices, those little stony chickens. An Allosaurus and a red dragon wormlings. This is for players level 3 or 4, which is pretty big stuff. And he has to pay them. The man who's of course this ridiculous circus dude pays the players to capture them alive. So the interesting thing is here, it's not just a question of going to hunt down all these animals. You actually have to bring them back and capture them, or you don't get the reward. But there's just no, you can see here it's only one page, and there's just no real information here. It just says, it's hard for me to lay out step by step what may happen. Well, you fucking designed the quest. I need you to lay that out. I'm sorry, but I was very frustrated by this. I think it's a bunch of, what it boils down to is too many of them turn into adventure hooks. This is the difference between an adventure hook, which is an initial idea, and then DMs have to fill in the blank, and actual quests, which is you're giving me that content, you're scripting all that information. So what helps is that they say, okay, at least the Allosaurus has killed a goat and is now being attacked by a farmer, and there's a standoff right there. That's good. And it says the red dragon wormling has been attacked by townsfolk and is tied down in the middle of this village. It's actually wandered over to this other village. That's pretty good as well, although it opens up a barrel of worms because there's no information about the villagers or what the dragon's done or what this village is even called, any of that. But it still doesn't include any kind of what kind of animal checks are we looking at, or survival checks to find things, or what are we dealing with. It just kind of throws up his hands and says, well, good luck, DMs. Here's the information. So it really boils down to more of an adventure hook than an actual quest. But I thought it was a neat idea. And what happens if players say, I don't like the fact that you're capturing these monsters, which, dragons are sentient too, right? That's really morally reprehensible. So, what happens if players don't want to, what do they want to free all the other animals and let them go free and stuff? There's no, information about that. So, neat idea, but disappointing in the end. The Runaway is in need of a content warning label of like child abuse. But I think it's actually a pretty good story, and I enjoyed the twist at the end, and doesn't involve any actual combat. So you're investigating a missing person, in this case a teenage boy, and you end up talking to people, and you realize that you talk to his best friend, and he mentions the fact that there's this girl, and he's kind of fallen in with the girl, but you're not sure if, what happened there, if they've just eloped together or whatever the situation was. It implies that the father of the girl is, maybe was angry at the son, and maybe like he got rid of the son or something. So you end up going to her family house, and it's like empty and kind of boring. There's nothing really to do there. But then you get to the cellar, and you find the dad all tied up, and he's angry, and he's like, oh, they've they knocked me out and tied me up, and they've been living in my house, and they just escaped with all my stuff, and just, go get them. And you go get them, and then becomes the next twist, which is he's like, yeah, he's an asshole. He's been abusing her. We did that, and now we're getting out of here. So, assuming your players are okay with that level of content, I think it's actually a pretty decent story, and really brings in the fact that your players now have choices to make. Like, well, do we still bring them back because they kind of assaulted the day? It's interesting. It's kind of high level, mature storytelling stuff you have to be prepared for your players, which I thought was kind of a bold choice to include, as otherwise what was a series of kind of classic side quest adventures, and all of a sudden you have this very serious story of like child abuse and teenagers trying to escape a bad situation and all that. So I thought it was pretty interesting, but definitely needed some kind of content warning there. Sacrifice definitely feels like a low-level D&D quest where it's you're also investigating a missing person, but in this case, you literally just follow a trail and it leads to a cave, and there's a bunch of gnolls in the cave. That's it. But in this case, again, I don't know why it's ambiguous. Like, the dungeon is not really designed. It says, feel free to leave loot and treasure throughout the cave for your players. Well, design the dungeon with loot and treasure. It's got the arrows and stuff, but the trap arrow, which is the same one as the other dungeon, and then says there should be one gnoll pack lord and a gnoll bard. It's up to you where you place these creatures within the cave system. Well, yes, it can always be up to me, but just put them in the dungeon. I feel like I'm yelling. I shouldn't do that, but I was extremely irritated over and over and over again that the designer specifically left so much up to DMs, and that is not at all what I want. Like, every time you can include, if you want, if it makes you feel better, a disclaimer at the beginning that says, hey, DMs, take whatever you want and roll with it and modify and feel free to change things. Again, I think that is implied and assumed by every single product that DMs are going to do that. But if that makes you feel better, you can include at the beginning. But you don't have to and should not leave it so much ambiguous where you're not going to literally design parts of your adventure because you want to leave that up to DMs. Not only is that irritating as hell for somebody who wants to see what you've designed, but also I think that's the opposite of what you should do to new DMs. If anything, for new DMs, you should spell that stuff out specifically and overscript everything, because a new DM is probably not going to be going off on their own too often. Instead, they're going to want to see what you. So I think this is actually the opposite of being helpful for new DMs, because it's too ambiguous. It's leaving too much up to them. I think you want to keep newer DMs on a shorter leash, and then once they get more comfortable with it, then they can, go their own way and figure things out and modify stuff as they see fit. The worst example of this is the wizard. The wizard is literally just an adventure hook. This is not a quest. It's just an adventure. It's this old man says, I have to get home before dawn the next day or bad things will happen. He doesn't explain what the bad things are. He doesn't explain where his home is, and it literally says, the designer says, I've given you a hook for this adventure. That's not a quest. That's an adventure hook. When I got to the end, I was very mixed about it, because I liked a lot of the ideas here. I loved the maps and things, but it was irritating me about the ambiguity. And then I got to this quest, and I just kind of stared at it for a long time, going, "You've got to be fucking kidding me!" Like, at this point, I feel like the designer is just trolling me with a quest that is obviously not a quest, just an adventure hook. Now, that being said, I do love these grid battle maps. Like I just don't get this very often, especially in a product of this size and relative simplicity, where it's not full on, campaign adventures. These are just mini quests. The fact that we get maps for all of these encounters, and I say nearly because technically the one with the runaway teenagers, there's no map for that because there's not meant to be any combat. So I use nearly instead of every, but still, it's very, very impressive. I'm really glad we got those. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Tales from the Stonehill Inn. Pros: 10 easy-to-run side quests that take place in and around Phandalin. I should say 9, but I'll go ahead and say 10. They are easy to run. None of them are very complicated. The dungeon crawl of Halfling Bandit is the longest one, but any DM should be able to at least start them. We'll get to the con on why I think it's difficult to actually run some of them, though. Pro: excellent variety of quests, including investigating missing persons, capturing escaped animals, and a good old-fashioned dungeon crawl. I appreciated that they weren't all just fetch quests. They weren't all just missing people. You got to run into that burning building and save people. You got to recapture the animals. There was the dungeon crawl. You got to investigate the teenage runaways. There are some fetch quests, but it's still a good variety. And pro, of course, the grid maps I will include as a big thumbs up. Full color grid maps for nearly every single quest and encounter. Huge thank you for that. Cons: too many suggestions and ideas in place of actual content, which is a big problem for me. In a lot of these, just about half, I would say half of these quests lacks the content that I feel like should have been there, and instead replaces that with, hey DM, do whatever you need here. That's not good design in general, and especially not welcome design for something that's designed for new DMs. And the other con is that one of the quests is just an adventure hook. It's not a quest. I don't like that at all. This is not... No, don't do that. If you want to do adventure hooks, then do adventure hooks. But you said quests, so I specifically looked at side quests, and most of these, at least, is exactly what I would consider under the realm umbrella term of side quest. This one is not. This is honestly really just an adventure hook. Final verdict: designed to easily slot into the D&D 5e starter adventures, Tales from the Stonehill Inn offers a welcome variety of simple side quests, along with a frustrating amount of ambiguity. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Thomas, Captain Mike, Adam, Aiden, Stan, Nathan, Alex, Chad, Alexander, Dan, Daniel, Cam, and Quizats, Hatterack. And gold patrons: RPG, Papercraft, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Glenn, Nick, Farty Mick, Butterpants, Blood, Angel, Vornus, Baboon, Nathan, Fast Like Tortoise, and James. Thank you all very much for your support.